Hey there, folks. Welcome to another edition of Stranger in a Southern Land. I, of course, am your host, Jake Manning. Today on the program, I speak with Humpy Wheeler and let you guys know that the guest for next week is also Humpy Wheeler because this is my first two-parter. Yes, that's right, folks. This will be a two-part edition of Stranger in the Southern Land. This was a fantastic conversation with Humpy Wheeler, the guy who was former president and GM of the Charlotte Motor Speedway, and he's a large part of why NASCAR is big business here in Charlotte, North Carolina. And you know, I was talking to Humpy. I was only supposed to have an hour with him, but I was talking to him, and it got to about the half an hour mark, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to get very greedy with my time with this man because he is so fascinating, so smart, and just so knowledgeable. It's like, I'm going to get everything I possibly can out of this man. I'm going to talk to him until somebody kicks me out. And nobody did. That's the thing. Is like, but then I got to a point like, I've talked to him for 2 hours. Like, I can't be too greedy, but who knows? Maybe they part 3 with this man. I would love that because, like, Humpy was so wonderful. Like, he's got so many great stories of like the early days of NASCAR, which is mostly what this part will be covering. Is the early days, his days when he was a driver, when he first started promoting racing events and stuff like that, and how he almost died doing both of those. So he's full of great stories and great insights and intellect and stuff like that, and just a fascinating man. I can't think of anybody better to be my first two-parter than Humpy Wheeler. He was fantastic. You guys are going to enjoy each part of this, so I want to get into them as quickly as possible, so I don't want to take up too much time on the intros. But as always, I want to let you know, thank you to everybody who's listening to this podcast. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes, Google Play. Make sure you write a review. Those things help to get this out to as many people as possible. So please subscribe on iTunes, write a review on iTunes, and also Google Play and SoundCloud and YouTube and Vimeo and wherever this is. And make sure you visit the site, sslshow.com. Also, too, big thank you to Shining Wizards Network for all the work that they do to get this podcast out to as many people as possible. And of course, you can look them up and all their other podcasts at shiningwizardsnetwork.com. Also, big thank you to my producer Don and all the other podcasts that we do together. Of course, I've got another podcast with my good friend Zane Riley, and the podcast that we do is called How Did This Get Booked, and it is available at dsct.tv, as well as iTunes and Google Play and all the other places. But Don produces that other podcast for me, so make sure you check out Don at dsct.tv. Now, as always, I've got to be a little bit of a promoter myself and let you know where I'm going to be at. I've got a lot of comedy dates. I got some wrestling dates in here. I'm going to feed them to you as quickly as possible. And, like I said, I'm going to promote. I got to promote myself, and it's only fitting. I'm talking to a promoter in Humpy Wheeler, so I'm going to get as many dates out there as I possibly can. So hopefully you guys show up. I got to be a good promoter. If I'm going to be talking to a good promoter on this podcast, I got to be a good promoter myself and promote myself. And I got to let you guys know about, most specifically, Friday, September 2nd, the 1-year anniversary of Monstrous Comedy, which will be happening at the Evening Muse in the Noda district of Charlotte, North Carolina. I'll be doing stand-up with Nick Alexander, Jen Snyder, Cliff Cash. It's just going to be a big show, top to bottom. Spencer Taylor's going to be there, Jake Stewart. It's going to be an awesome and fantastic show, so make sure you show up for that. Now, also, too, if you missed that show, don't worry. There's going to be some more good comedy coming to the Evening Muse next week, where I will be hosting on Wednesday, September the 7th, the all-organic open mic, and the featured performer that night is Ian Aber. For more information about that show and Monstrous Comedy, make sure you log on to eveningmuse.com. Now, also that week after the all-organic open mic, I will be hosting at Bonkers over at the Executive Park Hilton on September 9th and 10th, which is a Friday and Saturday. For more information about those shows, make sure you log on to Bonkers Comedies Productions. Bonkers with a Z, that is. And then, of course, next week I've got some more comedy to give you, which will be Thursday, September 15th. Monstrous Comedy again. Monstrous Comedy is going crazy in September, and I think this is going to be one of the best shows they run in the entire month. On Thursday, September 15th, the roast of Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Now, Hillary and Trump are not scheduled to appear. literally. They may be there figuratively, and there may be a lot of jokes geared in their direction. But it is the roast of Hillary and Trump, and that will be happening at Petra's in the Plaza Midwood area. For more information about that, make sure you look up Monstrous Comedy on Facebook.com. Now, also that weekend, I've got a lot of wrestling. It's going to be a big weekend of wrestling, and it kicks off with Queens of Combat on Friday, September 16th in Gibsonville, North Carolina, and then also in the afternoon on September 17th, Queens of Combat will be in Gastonia, North Carolina, and the reason why that's an afternoon show, because at night on September 17th, PWX will also be running in Gastonia, I believe at the National Guard Armory. For more information about those two shows and that double shot, I believe ticket prices is you pay one, you get both shows on that day on the 17th. But for more information about all that, make sure you log on to combatqueens.com or pwxpro.com. And now the next day after that, that's Sunday, September 18th, Freight Train, my buddy Freight Train, the guy from Power of the Freight Train, my good buddy from $5 Wrestling, is running a wrestling show in Albemarle, North Carolina. Now, I know there's a Panther game going on at 1 o'clock, but that's why we're going to have a wrestling show at 6 p.m. So you can watch the Panthers beat whoever they're going to beat that day, and then you can watch some professional wrestling at Albemarle, North Carolina at 6 p.m. For more information about that show, well, just follow me on social media. I'll be tweeting out that poster regularly. And how you can follow me on social media, it's very easy to do. I'm very active on Twitter. I'm very available at ManScoutManning or on Instagram at ManScoutManning. If you have a question about the podcast, or if you want to become a sponsor of this podcast, make sure you email me at jake@sslshow.com. Or if you're looking for an upcoming wrestling event, make sure you email me at manscoutmanning@yahoo.com. Now that I'm done promoting myself, let's jump into this wonderful conversation with legendary promoter, former president of the Charlotte Motor Speedway, and racing legend. Part 1 with racing legend Humpy Wheeler, here on Stranger in a Southern Land. I know Payday's in there somewhere.
Yeah, Payday's in there somewhere.
That is for sure. But no, like we're just gonna sit down and have a conversation. Nothing big. I do a big intro beforehand, so we can just roll right in this conversation. Like I said, if you just want to talk about fishing for an hour, we'll talk about fishing. But I think people would be a little bit disappointed when they when they download this thing like that. You only talked about fishing with Humpy Wheeler. But Mr. Wheeler, I can't thank you enough for allowing me into your fantastic home. This is a wonderful estate, a compound. I don't know what you reference it as. This is obviously the place where you retreat to after your hard work.
Well, I started off with nothing, and my wife and I, we got married when we were in our early 20s and moved up to Ohio to work for Firestone. And in January, I'll never forget it, we were had a 1-year-old daughter, and we pulled down Main Street, Akron, and she'd never been out of the South, and the wind was blowing sideways, it was snowing sideways, and the temperature had gotten all the way up to 5 below. And this guy comes out of the Gulf station. This was a full-service filling station, and he had a beard and a mustache, and it was completely frozen. This got to work for the filling station. And my wife looked at me and she says, "Where have you brought me?" But it turned out to be a great thing for us because we learned how warm and hospitable the people in the Midwest were, particularly in the middle of the winter.
Well, yeah, you have to be. Something has to be warm in the Midwest. So it's got to be the people.
That's right.
It's definitely not the weather. That's for sure.
No, it was a great experience for us, and I got a chance to learn about Indy cars and work on the Indy car circuit and the F1 circuit, and in addition to NASCAR. So it was a great experience for me, and eventually enabled me to help get Mario Andretti started in his racing career, Bobby Marshman, who unfortunately got killed, to get to know and very few people can say this, really like A.J. Foyt. And most of the top drivers of the day I was fairly close to because I was around them every day. It was like, whether it was NASCAR or Indy cars, it was like a small town of 1,000 people, and you were just around them all the time.
Yeah, see, that's what I find fascinating. That's why I was so glad that I got to sit down and talk with you, because I think we were talking off camera, we were talking a lot about wrestling and stuff like that. Like, this city's really about wrestling, and I know a lot about that part of Charlotte and this area, but like, racing is such a large part of this area, especially in North Carolina, that I feel like I don't know a lot about it. So hopefully you're going to educate me a lot in this conversation. But like, in this area, can you just talk about, like, because you grew up here, like, how did you become exposed to it? And it seemed like it was a very tight-knit group. Like, everybody kind of knew everybody. Like, much like in wrestling in this area, it was like everybody kind of knew everybody. It was this tight-knit thing. And all the locals knew how great it was. And it wasn't quite as big nationally. But when it did, it's this weird thing of the small niche thing that has now exploded to a worldwide phenomenon. But, like, talk about those early days of racing in North Carolina. Like, what was that like?
Okay.
I have no idea. It's just fascinating.
This is a good time.
You're like, I better grab my water. I'm going to be talking to this guy for a while. I've got to give the whole history of NASCAR to this guy. But no, like, the early days of it, like, it seemed like this renegade outlaw thing. Like,
well, early days of racing, we would associate with after World War II, and the boys came home, and most of them had worked in the cotton mills or out in the fields, working with cotton or indigo or whatever it was. It was farming, and so once they'd seen Paris, even though it was during wartime, or the South Pacific, coming back to these little towns in the South was pretty boring. So some of them wanted a little more than that, and the ones that wanted a little more than that seemed to dive into things like stock car racing, wrestling, boxing, baseball.
Manlier things,
Manlier things.
You just got done fighting a war, like, you need that thing.
You want to go out and just hit the baseball.
Yeah.
You wanted to attack somebody in the ring or attack somebody in on an oval track or something like that. And so it was interesting to see those guys come out of there. And the interesting part about it is that stock car racing was cheap. There was a war going on after World War II was over between midget promoters and stock car promoters. Midgets being the small, not midgets driving the cars, but midgets in little small cars.
So that would have been a very interesting war if it was little people.
It would have been very interesting. Stock cars won hand-me-down because it was so much cheaper. Midgets required speed chops, and we didn't even have speed chops in the South. They were all in the Midwest and the Far West. So the guy working in the cotton mill, he could literally go find him a 37 Ford Coupe and put a Mercury engine in it from a junkyard, Mercury radiator, 3/4 ton truck rear end, heavy duty wheels and tires off the truck, and he had a race car. A little BFG spray paint or a can of paint so he could paint the car, and he was racing. And most of the time, if he knew what he was doing and had some buddies who wouldn't charge him for labor, he could be racing for somewhere in the $200 range.
Oh, wow.
I mean, you couldn't even imagine that today.
Yeah, it seems like you have a considerable amount of money today where, like, if you just put $200 down, you're basically a stock car driver.
And there was another interesting phenomena from Birmingham, Alabama, up into Virginia. basically along what is now I-85. There was a band of red clay that was stretched about 50 miles on each side of 85. And all you had to do was take a bulldozer or you could do it with a scrape if you had to, and a water truck, and you had a racetrack. And therefore, in the mid-50s, say around 1955, if you took a census around Charlotte, say 100 miles, you'd probably find yourself with around 50 or 60 racetracks, all running on Saturday night.
Wow.
It was a little bit like, I remember flying over Texas when I was at Firestone on Friday night. And I mean, I'm out in the middle of nowhere, Texas, and I keep seeing these little, I said, are we in space? I said, there's all these little football fields around, you know, and it was been the same thing here. There were little racetracks here, there, and everywhere. Now, they mostly ran on Saturday night, but it was a combination of the ease of taking red clay and making a track out of it, and the fact there was a lot of wood. It took 3 people to make a racetrack. I used to say this. First of all, there had to be a guy named Slick who was just a little smarter than the rest of us. And he would go out and he would promote these deals. He'd go to a farmer and get the land and give him a third. Mm-hmm. Then he'd go to the sawmill operator and get a third for the wood, for the bleachers and the outhouses and the fences and all that kind of stuff. And then he kept a third, and with his third, he conned somebody into taking the motor grader and shaping the track and doing that. And so it didn't take much cash to build a track. It just took a concentrated effort of about 3 people. And that's why so many of them were built. And in places that are really kind of at the end of nowhere, I mean, Riverside down in South Carolina, Newberry in South Carolina. You had tracks in places, Harris in North Carolina, Mohead Junction. You didn't want to go to Mohead Junction. That was that's not Moorhead. That's just Mohead, and that was a pretty rough spot. A lot of most of these places were rough spots, but it also was the reason why people liked to see them race there, because it was wild and woolly, you know.
Oh yeah, there was a dirt track just not far from where I went to college in Illinois, and I just went there because it was very small. Reckless at times.
Yeah.
You know, bring your own beer, and you know, if you're going to sit front row, you're like, I might as well drink because I might not. Sure. The car might come out. There's not a lot of safety here, so there's a sense of that danger, and you're that close to it. I understand that appeal, but you were saying mostly it was because of the topography here. It was probably part of the reason why it grew so big here in this area.
There's no place in the United States, Canada, Mexico, etc., that had the type of red clay that we had here, that it made it so easy to build a track from a quarter mile to a half mile. It was just simple and inexpensive. And then also you didn't have to water it very much to keep the dust down.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's fascinating. But so I've been to the NASCAR Hall of Fame like several times, and it always fascinates me when they talk about like the earlier days and just like how outlaw it was and renegade and the individuals that were doing it. Like I said, you just brought up the idea of like there has to be a guy named Slick, and you know just there has to be characters that are piecing this sport together.
Well, I always said that the survivors of the Civil War, half of them came home and there wasn't anything at home. So they went to Texas. The other half stayed here and eventually became stock car racers. They were tough people. They were Scotch-Irish people. There's a great book out James Webb wrote called Born Fighting. And it's about the Scots-Irish. We've had books about the Italians and this, that, and the other, but and the English. But this is the first time somebody came out and wrote a book about the Scotch-Irish and their contribution or discontribution. Now, I'm Scotch-Irish. I can talk about us.
You're allowed.
Rough bunch of people. And the reason they were is because in Great Britain, Hadrian's Wall separated Scotland from England. So the cultures did not mix, and the language did not mix. And would you like to go for a drink? Says the Scotsman. This did not improve as time went on because they wanted to fight each other all the time, particularly the Scots. If it got dull and boring, they went out to look for an Englishman and had a royal fight. The other reason for the just nasty nature of the Scotch-Irish was because of how they made their living. In the early days, before the woolen mills, the Scotch-Irish raised livestock. The English raised gardens, hay, barley. So did most of Europe. Well, somebody comes by and steals a bushel of wheat, you're not going to go out and follow him 100 miles and then bonk him over the head. But if somebody steals one of your 2 cows, you're going to go after that guy and you're going to physically affront him. I think one of the great examples of that is when General Ferguson in Revolutionary War, near the end of it, when the Brits thought they were going to win the war, he made a statement that I think cost England the war. There he is. He is an American, but he is a loyalist. Okay, he's for England, and he's fighting for England. He's a general. And we had all these Scots-Irish boys sitting up in the mountains surviving. That's all they were doing. They weren't fighting a war. They were just surviving because of the nature of the land. And so but they were very, very strong revolutionaries. They were for the revolution. And Ferguson just out of nowhere says, I'm going to go up and kick your butt. Well, that's letting sleeping dogs lie. Mm-hmm. As soon as they heard that, it was just the nature and the instinctive feeling of those Scotch-Irish people to say, we're coming down and kicking yours.
Yeah, because they're genetically predisposed to fighting. So
genetically predisposed to fighting. That's like in a wrestling match. The guy's sitting there in the mind of his own business, in the third row, and one of the wrestlers says, hey, boy, I'm going to whip your butt when I get through whipping this other guy. Well, he's going to have a fight right then. He's not going to have to wait, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's what happened. All these guys up in the mountains got together, and they went down and met. They came out of the hills, out of the hollows of Tennessee, Kentucky, North Carolina, South Carolina, the Georgia mountains with their Kentucky long rifles and a guerrilla way of fighting that the British had never seen. And they knew that Ferguson was on his way to meet him, and he was ensconced at Kings Mountain, which is between Charlotte and Spartanburg or Greenville. And they found him there, and it was a massacre. They just clobbered him because, again, the British did not know they knew Americans fought guerrilla style, but they had never seen guerrillas like these mountain boys. Mm-hmm. These mountain boys could hide behind a twig, and they were something else. I'm proud to say that one of my ancestors is up there on the plaque on the top. But born fighting, and so this all transposed to stock car racing. If this had been, some cultures are benign. I've been to tracks all over the world, and I've seen races that I keep wondering when they're going to start. There are a bunch of guys that are just calm and peaceful, and they don't want to race. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, are they on Valium or what? When are they going to start? It's like two big old heavyweights fighting, and nothing happens.
Yeah.
And you're thinking, I really need to be somewhere else. Well, when you get Scotch-Irish people out there in the racetrack, it is hell on wheels because they're going to be slamming and bamming. And I think that was very necessary for the ascent of what we now know is NASCAR racing. There used to be a track down outside of Spartanburg, between South Carolina. And I can see it when I'm going down 685 now. Very few people can because they don't even know where it is. On Friday night, it was World War III on the dirt track. Guys had come out of the hills of Tennessee. They'd come out of Kentucky. They'd come down from the Allegheny Mountains. They'd come up from the swamps of Florida to run there on Friday night. It wasn't the purse. It was who they were running against. Bobby Isaac. Now, this was not a NASCAR track. And Bill France said, well, if you don't run NASCAR, we're suspending you, and we're calling these tracks outlaw tracks. They weren't any more outlaw tracks than Man in the Moon. They were just race tracks that weren't NASCAR sanctioned. Mm-hmm. Well, everybody changed their name that was NASCAR. One guy that was real good, Ned Setzer, he changed his name to Walt Drum. Bobby Isaac had several nom de plume. David Pearson had the same.
So like all these NASCAR guys would like come up with fake names just so they could run.
Oh yeah.
Just because they wanted the competition.
Yeah.
Because they just loved it so much.
They just loved it so much.
Oh wow.
And so did it get rough. There was a guy from Tennessee who was legendary. He didn't have to change his name. His name was Paul Ghost. And he ran a car that looked like a ghost. And he was almost unbeatable at that Cowpens. Cowpens Speedway was the name of it. And everybody would go after it. And there were so many characters in all this. I remember I went down there, and I was probably 15 and racing, and my mother was pretending I wasn't. And my car wasn't running quite right, and I suspected it was a carburetor. And so somebody suggested, oh, the reason you're not running right is you don't have a Black Cat carburetor. Well, there was a guy named Black Cat. He had an appliance white 34 Ford coupe, and painted appliance white because I'm sure he got that cheap at Sears and Roebuck. So I went up and I said, Cat, that's what everybody called him. I said, I need some of your, I need one of your carburetors. He'd say, all right. Well, you don't like to leave the track when you're there, you know. Mm-hmm. And so, but we did. He lived about a mile away, and we zipped over there. Well, it was this trailer that was kind of leaning over. There wasn't a clean spot on it. The door handle had every different color of grease you could have on it. And there were engine blocks, there were little motor scooters, there was everything you could think of out in the yard. It was a junkyard yard. And little kids running around in it. And so we went up, walked in his house, and of course it wasn't very big, so right away we saw the refrigerator. Opened the door of the refrigerator, and it was full of carburetors. Black Cat carburetors. That was his secret. It was cold. And I bought it hook, line, and sinker and paid $7.50 more than you would normally pay for a carburetor. And when I put it on my car, I actually thought I ran faster.
Maybe that's all you needed. Maybe just to believe that you could, you know?
I needed that Black Cat carburetor. And so a lot of crazy stuff. And we went down to, there was a guy at a track down in Newberry, South Carolina. And it was a 6/10 mile horse track. Well, you can't race on. That's too big a track to race on. And so the promoter, this is how people got in this business at the time. He sold sandwiches in the cotton mills through what we call dope wagons. The wagons they pulled the concessions around with had drinks and sandwiches and stuff in it. And the drinks in those days in the South were called dopes. And the reason they're called dopes is some of the drinks were laced with like little minor traces of cocaine. And man, they give you a jolt or something that would pop you up. And so he had all these, and they made great sandwiches, but he may have 300 or 400 left over that weekend he had to get rid of. Because and he'd take them to he said, if I open a track and I can sell them at the track and I'll do good. And so he did. Well, he couldn't do it on that, and I said, look, his name was Lewis May. I said, what you want to do is you want to cut this track down to about a quarter mile, so you get all the action close together. Well, he and I and about 6 other guys, within a week, we had it down to a quarter mile. And here these guys come back with their cars, and they couldn't believe that the track was so small. And being so small, it became combat alley, because you could not pass anybody without hitting them. And so what I did, I started thinking, I said, I'm going to find the biggest car I can so they can't pass me. So I found a 1950 Packard in the parking lot. I mean, in a used car lot, and I paid $50 for it. And it had a pretty good engine in it. We put race tires on it. And didn't need a roll cage. It was so thick, you know. So
because they used to make cars like that.
Yeah. You know? So they dropped the flag, and some reason or another, I got the pole position on the draw. And nobody could pass me, because then I see these little scooters, these little 34 Ford Coupes come up, and they would try to pass me. I'd just move over, and they'd hit my bumper and not do a thing. And it was like little bees, stinging. And so we went the whole 20 laps of the feature race, and I won the race. All those guys were so mad they couldn't see straight. So I knew it was going to be showdown at the track the next week. So I was playing football in South Carolina at the time, so I got the biggest guys I could and went over there because I knew there was going to be a fight. And sure enough, they're banging at me and whanging at me, and I know sooner or later they're going to take me out, because they'll get 4 or 5 cars and just push me out of the way. And well, they did, and it was right down the front straightaway. Well, the people had begun to like that car, some of them. Half the people liked it and half the people didn't. It was a villain. Mm-hmm. But from wrestling, some people like the villain.
Yeah, it's like the Ric Flair of cars is what you're driving
Ric Flair
around.
cars. So here we go around, and they take me out, and of course my guy, their guys come over, and they're going to fight. My guys come over, and we're going to fight. And a huge fight erupts down the front straightaway. I mean, it was they charged $1.50 to get in. It was worth $10 just to see the fight.
It's a race, and it's almost like a hockey fight,
It was. It was
all
the
breaks
whole
out.
deal. And of course we all knew each other, And so when we got through and wiped the blood up and all that kind of stuff, we all later laughed about it, but it took about 2 years before anybody could laugh. And so those are the kind of hijinks that went on at a lot of the tracks. And there was some dirty stuff went on, like your front bumper would you'd put a big flat piece of steel on the front bumper. Well, some guys would sharpen that edge of that steel. So all they had to do is touch a guy's wheel, and bang, he had a flat tire, and he was out of the ballpark. Or I remember running one track down in Greenwood, South Carolina, and we were going down the back straightaway, and this guy came up beside me as I was going into the corner, and the track was about 50 feet over the baseball field. And so he hit me with his right front, and he had one of those little sharp deals on the right front. He actually had a railroad spike that you could barely see, and all that spike had to do was touch a tire. And that car, just the tire exploded. Next thing you know, I'm out in the air. And I remember it was night. And I'm thinking, it's awful black. I wonder what I'm going to land on. And I was thinking, this might be my last day. And I landed on top of a brand new pickup truck. And I just squished it completely. And so that's the kind of crazy stuff that went on. They shouldn't have been playing a baseball game and running a stock car race at the same time, but they did. And so it went on and on like that. Later on, when I decided that my driving prowess was not what it should be, Cale Yarborough was the one that got me to retire. We had a terrible wreck coming off fourth turn at Sumter, and there was about 10 cars in it, and somebody landed on top of me. It was my fault. Somebody landed on top of me, and being a boxer, I got boxing and racing mixed up because I just thought you had to hit everything out there. Anyway, I'm up on the cars on top of me, and I could smell that gasoline, and I did not like that at all because I couldn't get out of my car. And I'm yelling at the guy up there. I said, "Have you got your fuel tank switched off?" And he was so mad he couldn't see straight, and he didn't know who was underneath him. Mm-hmm. And so finally, we got the cars untangled, and it was Cale. Now, Cale Yarborough and Buddy Baker and the Allisons and all of us came up together when we were teenagers at the Holman Moody shops at the Charlotte Airport. That was where you went to work for the summer. Now, Richard Petty didn't have the slightest idea what he was going to be. He thought he wanted to be a driver, but as far as being a guy that won 200 and being called the king, he didn't know he was going to do that. And I didn't know I was going to end up being the promoter, all that kind of stuff. We were just kids working. Mm-hmm. And Cale looked at me and he says, "Humpy, one of us needs to retire." And I got the message, so I quit.
Well, why did you get the message? You could have just been stubborn, like, "No, why didn't you retire?" What was the thing that?
Well, because I had a number of wrecks going up to that time, and he was getting exasperated with me. But being my friend, we didn't want to get in a fight over it. So he just said, "Why don't you retire?" But he never said you. He just said one of us ought to retire.
He's like, I'm either going to retire if you keep running because I can't stand it anymore.
Right.
And then, of course, you being probably the smarter man and probably taking in calculations and stuff like that. Like, if I keep doing this long enough, something really bad's going to happen.
Yeah, right. That's what I was thinking. So, anyway, that's when I started thinking I ought to start promoting. But racing back in those days was a form of entertainment, was the only professional form of entertainment in the South where guys got paid to compete other than wrestlers, boxers, some Class D. They had Class D baseball at the time.
Well, and you could see all that at a stock car race. You can see hitting. You can people body slamming each other and all kinds of stuff.
You can see all that.
So you could all get at a stock car race. All those other ones just right there. So
and then it didn't it didn't take long for the thing to just explode because of the fact that the tracks were cheap to make. Now, one of the things that didn't happen, unfortunately, was municipalities did not get behind stock car racing like they did baseball, basketball, and football. They wouldn't think twice. In a millisecond, they'd build a minor league baseball field.
With taxpayer money and everything else.
Money, football field, and then they'd say, well, the high school can play in it and all that kind of stuff. No racetrack. They're not going to build a racetrack. So we had very poor facilities because there was no money. And I always used to think, I opened my first racetrack when I was 22. I had 2 old race cars. I had no money, but I had 2 old race cars. And Marvin Panch was running this track in Gastonia, fabulous little high back quarter mile called Robin Hood Speedway. And he said, I just can't make it. He says, you ought to take the track over. And so I did. And I had to sell my 2 race cars to do it. And so here we go to first race. And Saturday night, I came in the track. And I had advertised it, and I'd promoted the dickens out of it, and I'd done everything you could have. I had absolutely not 1 penny in my pocket left. So how am I going to pay the purse? If nobody shows up, I got about 25 drivers that are going to be seriously after me because they didn't get paid. And so one of the things I had done This guy had an airplane out in Belmont. At Belmont International Airport was about a quarter mile of rather bad grass, and he had a old World War I biplane there, and I'd been up with him a couple of times, and so I went up there because I had a bunch of leaflets I wanted to throw out.
Well, I thought you were setting up the airplane as an escape plan.
Well, I thought about that too.
I thought that's where the story was going.
I thought about that too. I got out there and I couldn't find him anywhere. I went to his house, I couldn't find him. And I said, hell, I got to get these things out. Saw the different colored papers, and it said, racing Saturday night, Robinwood Speedway. And
here, if you want to tip the microphone just towards your direction.
Got that done. So he's not there. So I said, hey, I'm gonna fly it. Well, I mean, it was simple. You had a stick and rudder and all that. So I took off and got up there and got over a place called Clover, South Carolina, which was a cotton mill town. I started dropping those sheets out from about 500 feet. And, man, the kids would run out, because these were the dullest towns in the world. They were kind of like steel towns up in, Gray.
I know Clover. It's still the same way today.
Yeah, that's right. And all these colorful things would come out, and the kids run out like it was an ice cream truck. They wanted to see what was on there. Well, I'm coming back, and I got over the river, which was the partial entryway into the airport. And all of a sudden it went choom, choom. And I looked down at the gas tank, and there wasn't anything registering. The needle wasn't even budging. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm going to die right here without making my first race. Well, I turned.
Because you thought promoting was the safer option at this time.
Safer option at that time. And I got down through there, and I actually lowered it, which they were so easy to fly, except I had to get through these woods. And I am sure that I twinkled a couple of trees coming down, but I did make it. Probably the worst landing in the history of flight, because it bounced about 50 feet after I hit the ground first. Well, there he was, looking for his airplane. Oh, did he ever chew me out? And I said, well, no, wait a minute. I said, I'll fill the plane up with gas. And he said, I'll have you in jail. And I said, well, I'm not going to do you any good in jail. I'll cut your grass too. So I finally did that, but he kept the lock on that plane ever since.
Did
the reason is no one in Belmont knew how to fly except him, so he didn't worry about locking it up.
Yeah, and obviously now, he's like, well, it's either me or Humpy that are going to fly this plane, and Humpy would never do anything like that, surely.
No, but we had a great crowd that night, and it was packed. The weather was great and all that. But, I started doing more dirt, promoting more dirt races, and beginning to meet people like Ralph Earnhardt, Banjo Matthews, and Cotton Owens, and all the colorful guys that we had back in those days, and it started becoming a lot of fun. When it stopped being fun is when I got to Indianapolis, and from the period of 64 to 70 was the bloodiest period in the history of automobile racing. Never did we go through a period as bloody as that. The cars were too fast. The fuel was located too close to the drivers. It was just like putting a driver down in a bed of gasoline. And then the stock cars weren't much better because they had 22-gallon tanks in the back, and it was just a little piece of metal to keep that gas in, and the engines were just brutally fast. And so I got, unfortunately, experienced a whole bunch of people getting killed, which I didn't like. No one does. And I seriously thought at one time about getting out because there's just so much you can take, and I was so close to it. But things got better. As racing always does, it's kind of an animal in its own. It will cure its own problem. And of course, it cured the fire problem with the fire cell. It cured the tire problem, the blowing out and then running into the concrete wall, with the interliner. So, fortunately, in the last 10 years, we've enjoyed a pretty safe record up to a point. But racing's a dangerous sport. You know, you can get a ACL torn in football. You get your neck broken in wrestling. You get terrible concussions in a lot of other types of sports, particularly baseball and football and boxing. But you don't worry too much about dying.
Mm-hmm.
Racing, you do. And America had been the safest of all. Where it's really tough is in Europe. And you go over there and it's just like, okay, who's next? And
why is that? They're just not the restrictions?
they have a different mentality about it. They have a different mentality about death in racing than we do here. I had a guy come to my house yesterday, one of the best young promoters in the country, and we talked about this 27-year-old guy that was a fantastic sprint car driver that got killed last week. And he was like the end of the world because we lost this guy. And he was good looking. He was a good spokesman. He was a good. He's gonna sell a lot of tickets. And so that's just the way racing is, though. And anybody that's in it and has to prepare for it, the day-to-day deal, has got to think that way. He's got to think about the fact that he's going to witness or be around death at some point. And how's he going to react to it? And I've seen an awful lot of people react very unfavorably to it. Not that there's a favorable way that you should act, but it's just one of those things that you have to confront every once in a while.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like when you forget, that's when it comes back sometimes. All right, folks, that was part 1. I hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, this was about the point in the interview where I'm like, no, I'm going for broke. I'm going to talk to this man as much as possible. And hopefully you feel the same, that you want to listen to more. But don't worry, more will be coming next week. It'll be dropping right on Labor Day. So, kick back, fire up the grill, and then on Labor Day, fire up part 2 of my conversation with Humpy Wheeler. So thank you very much for downloading this. Make sure you log on and subscribe at iTunes or on Google Play, and make sure you leave a review if you love what you're listening to. So thank you very much for listening to another edition of Stranger in a Southern Land. I'll see you for part 2 with my conversation with Humpy Wheeler.